Hello, we're going to take a bit of a detour here. We've been talking mostly about code and writing software because that's the purpose of this course. But if we're going to create a game, then we need to think about graphics. So I'm not trying to turn you into great graphic artists. This is purely us learning enough so that we can develop the graphics we're going to need for our game. So if you remember back at an earlier slide, we said that a program is made up of two things. It's made up of code, which we've focused on so far, your variables and your your statements and that sort of thing, but also our assets, and we haven't looked at that yet. So let's look at that now. So what are assets? So in a game, as well as the code, we need things like graphics. That's the kind of the backgrounds and the characters and stuff like that. Your sound effects, that's your explosions and your sound of people running. Music, other things as well. But just to give you an idea that a game is made up of not just code but all these other things. And why? Why? Because games need graphics. But why do we think of them as separate? It might sound like an obvious thing, but it's worth kind of spending a few seconds thinking about. Is that the skills that are required to write software are different from the skills that are required to create art. And it's not necessarily the same people who are good at one will be good at the other. And so in projects, you'll often have different people with different skills who are focusing on creating that thing. So you'll have sound effects engineers and musicians creating the sounds and the music, and you'll have coders creating the code. You'll have designers, level designers designing the levels and stuff like that. The reason that we separate these out, partly because different people do them, and partly we need to treat these things differently. So what's important for managing videos, which often are huge file sizes and require a lot of time to produce and then get rendered down, is very different from code, which is very quick to create but needs to be managed very carefully. Because if we change a line of code, we need to know why and how that's affected other parts of the system. So we store these things differently, we deal with them differently, and different people create them. Why is this important for people who are not writing games? Well, the same is true of normal software. Even if an application is mostly just code, is just writing software, there's always assets there. There's icons, there's layouts, there's there's mock-ups, there's all these different things that are created by different people for different purposes. So being aware that within a software project you get different types of artifacts and they're managed differently and created by different people, it's a very important step in becoming a software engineer. But that's all we're going to cover about that. In this episode and through these videos, we're just going to focus on two different things. One is the graphics and one is the code, and we've been looking at the code so far. And now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the graphics. So just show you what we mean by this. So this is the demo program that we've all seen lots of times. If you click on the sprite editor, which we'll look at shortly, you can see that they've created these pictures here. If you look then at the code editor, you can see this line here. We've talked about the SPR, the sprite function or the procedure in the past. And what this does is it draws a sprite on the screen. And if we then run the application, we can see indeed it is drawing that sprite on the screen. And we're going to go through that process ourselves. I will mention, however, that one of the reasons I've chosen TIC80 to be the tool that we're using here is it builds all of these things into a single application. Usually you would have a different tool, different piece of software to do your drawing in, which, fine. It's not something we really want to spend our time doing when we're learning to program, is to be installing these tools and choosing them and whatever. So this is why we chose TIC80, because it brings it all together in a single application, which makes our lives easier. So I want to spend a little bit of time looking at the editor, saying how do you create graphics? How do we then include those in our programs in different ways? And then we'll talk about what do we do when we discover that we're not very good at drawing. Okay, so let's quit out of here. I'm going to still continue using this demo application, and I'm going to jump to the editor. So what we've got here is a big kind of, imagine this almost like a big sheet of paper with many blocks on it. And each one of these blocks, in the first instance, we'll think of each one of these blocks as a separate kind of character. So if I pick block number 5, this is block number 5 here, and I go over to here, this is our panel where we can draw something in block number 5. So let me just draw a kind of yellow blobby face. Oops, that's the drawing tool, and click on the color. Then we kind of draw a yellow kind of blobby face there with a couple of eyes and a smile. There we go. And so over here we've got this, created a new sprite. Right, if we go to our editor, that's now available to us. So in here we can get rid of some of these lines here and draw the sprite. Now, if you remember in an earlier episode we said about parameters, so the sprite function will draw the sprite procedure will draw this sprite for us, but we need to put in some values here to tell it what to draw. And if we go to Google and we type in TIC80 SPR, then we can jump to the instructions on how to do it. And here are different parameters, and we're going to need to kind of understand each of these eventually in this course, but at the moment we're just going to look at ID, which is the number of the sprite, and the location, the X and Y coordinates that we're going to draw it. So if I say ID 5, because it was sprite number 5, let's quickly look at that. If you click on it there, it says sprite number 5 there. And the X and Y location, okay, well let's just stick that at 100, 100. And we run that, and there it is. We're drawing the sprite. I want to quickly talk you through what the rest of these parameters mean, because we need to worry about it. You can see our sprite here has these kind of black edges around it, where it's actually drawing the black pixels. I don't want it, that's kind of the background color. I want that to be transparent. If we look back at our function or our procedure here, this is what the color key is. The color key is the color which will be transparent. It's kind of what's described there. It can be more than one apparently. There can be more than one color that's transparent. Okay, so quitting out of that, going back to our code editor, we can say we want color 0. This we see this is the first color. The black is what we want to be transparent. So I want color 0 to be transparent. Run that again. It's working, so that's now showing through. As we get fancy, we'll have more things happening in the background, and we'll see that appears behind here. So there we go. So we've created a sprite, and now we are showing it on screen. Perfect. You'll notice though that our sprite here is rather small, whereas these ones are bigger. So what's going on here? In TIC80, you can choose to either have a very small sprite, which has 8 pixels high and 8 pixels wide, or you can choose to have them bigger. You are limited in the number that you can have, so you don't want to go crazy and have them all huge. But if you want to be able to have more pixels, then you can do that by having like 1, 2, 3, 4 made up of 4 blocks. So let's do that. So you could do it by trying to draw it as 4 blocks. We'll just have I guess we'll have an orange face. It's a bit bigger. You could try and do it pencil. You could try and do it like this, and then move over to here, and then draw it like that. And you can see over here it's kind of drawing it as a single. Or you can say, actually, I want this to be a bigger block. And you can see this square has now grown. And then if I click it on here, I can now edit this whole 4 or 2 by 2 block. There. You've got some drawing tools. I'll let you work them out yourself. You can kind of mirror that. You can make your pencil bigger. You can fill it in there. Let's give them some eyes. And a smile again. There we go. So now we've got this bigger sprite. So how do we display that? If you click on here, this is number 6. The reason this is 5, this is 6. If I tried to change that to say sprite number 6, we're not going to get what we want. You can see that it's actually just showing this one square. The TIC80, this system, doesn't know that there are 4 blocks making this up. So why would it know that when I say 6, I don't just want 6, I want 6 and 7 and 22 and 23. We need to tell it that that's what we need. And the way we do that in the editor is by parameters. It's parameters again. if I jump back to my instructions, you'll see it's this thing at the end here. It's these two numbers. We can tell it how wide, how many blocks and wide and how many blocks tall make our sprite, and for us it's 2 and 2. But if we're going to provide these two parameters at the end, unfortunately we need to provide these parameters in the middle as well. So I'll very quickly explain what these are. But scale is, do you want to draw it the same size as you've drawn it? Do you want it to be drawn the same size, or bigger or smaller? Do you want it to be flipped left and right, or flipped up and down, or rotated rather? You can see that there. The reason for that is that during the game we might not want to draw a different sprite for something facing the other direction. We might just want to flip it and mirror it and move it around, so that you're not having to create new art for it. We're just changing how the pixel is drawn on the screen. But for the purposes of what we're doing here, if we put 1, 0, 0 and then the width and height, that should do it. So let's do that. So 1 is the size of it, 0, 0, and now the width and height, and we said it's 2 blocks wide and 2 blocks high. 1, 2, and 1, 2. Let's do that. 2, 2, and there we go. So now we've got our face. Now you know how to draw pictures, and we've seen that we can kind of draw them at different sizes just by putting them into the different blocks, however big we want them, and then using the sprite function to say, is it a 2 by 2, which would be 16 by 16 pixels, or is it 1 by 1 block, which would be 8 by 8, or even bigger, whatever you want. So that's how to use the editor to create art. I want to finish off though by saying, look, clearly I am not a good artist. That's evident to you now, I think. So partly that doesn't matter. We're just creating a game for fun. It doesn't matter if you're not good at art. You know, could try and be better. That'd be a good idea. But I'm not good. However, there is a bit of a kind of a way of getting around this. Is you can find other people's art and use that instead. So let me show you a couple of ways of doing that. One is to look for free pixel art assets. So if you go to Google and you type in free pixel art assets, you'll find some. And I think this top link for me, which is itch.io, if we click on that and I say I want to find, so it's already tagged pixel art, so I'm going to see pixel art and I want to say cloud. There we go, there's a picture of a cloud. Now, it's not easy. It is possible, but it's certainly not easy to copy and paste these into TIC80. It's complicated. Look into it if you want to, but you've got to export the things and then add them and then re-import them. However, you don't necessarily need to. You could just simply copy it, right? So if I put my TIC80 application alongside, how can we do that? There we go. If I put that side by side, then I can use this editor and I could copy it. So this looks about so you might want to copy it exactly, or you might just want to use it to kind of get the basic idea. But you can see I'm starting to produce a cloud that looks a bit more like this cloud. So that's one way. The other way, which is similar really, is you could, here I'm looking at these kind of free things that people have uploaded that you can download as pictures and whatever. But and it's clear that you have the copyright for that, so that would be fine, or that at least you're allowed to do it. If you wanted to though, if you're looking for something more specific, you could say something like 16, right, 16, so here's one, pixel art, what should we say, flower. So then, lots of examples here. So then I could draw this cactus in the same way. I could say from here, I want to draw a cactus, and so it's got a plant spines on there. Right, so that's it. So in this video, we've talked about why we have assets, and we've said that in the TIC80 editor, you can kind of, in TIC80, you've got an editor to create them, and you can create them of different sizes, and you can use them of different sizes by using the sprite function. You can then use things like the scale and the flip and the rotate parameters to change how that looks. So as your character moves around, he might kind of change direction as he's moving around. That would be great. But then if you can't draw, don't worry about it. But if you want to create something that looks good, you can just take other people's examples and copy them. Hopefully that is giving you enough to be able to tackle the next exercise.